So hi, it's Kim Gould here and Richard Rudd's joining me, and this is the third in our series of Seeding the Great Change. And today we want to talk about, now I've got two slightly different phrasings, the future of humanity and the future human, Richard, which I think slightly different. So yeah, we want to see where we're going to go from here. And we've got some ideas about that, you and I. So would you like to start? Would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll start by saying that it's good news, and you know, especially in difficult times, I feel like this is a very important thing to be discussing because, as you said earlier to me, it seems like nothing good can come out of the situation we're in. Sometimes when you look at it, you're like, how can we get out of this? This incredibly complex set of circumstances that we've created for ourselves. And yet those are the situations that lead to incredible fast change, you know, and you know that's what crisis is and trauma is. And so it feels like what's actually happening is we're going through a funnel or a bottleneck, and the pressure of that bottleneck is what's creating this mutation, this change. And this transmutation, actually, I often think like the word mutation and transmutation, I think I described it in my book as like lots of mutations add up to one transmutation. So lots of changing individual humans add up to a changing humanity.
Yeah,
it's happening inside our body. It's the same process of awakening inside the individual is now also occurring throughout the collective. So that's the first time we've experienced that in our living memory anyway, because all we can do when we look back on the history that we know, the recorded history, is we see this sort of awakening according to individuals and within individuals. We haven't seen anything else. So we have these reference points and these teachings and wisdom. We don't have anything to describe this collective awakening. So that's interesting to open up.
And that has led to it speeding up because I think just look at the internet, for example, and the way we all share, and also when human design came along and it brought together those wisdoms from various parts of the world and synthesized them. And so suddenly, and I mean, Buddhism came to the West, and so everything started to come into the mix. And I think we had a certain number of decades where we were taking that in and, learning our yoga and, whatever we were doing, right? We were taking this in, these ideas. And then as we started to go onto the internet and really start to connect with each other, and news started to travel fast, things started to impact, I can see what's going on. I'm watching in real time, like literally watching the videos come in of the Black Lives Matters, on Twitter as they're actually happening live. That's extraordinary to have that level of interaction globally. And there was a few years back where I really noticed the shift that what I was doing was collective, not individual anymore in terms of my own process. I could just feel how different it was when it was just about me becoming a better person. All of a sudden, everything was about, we have to have a better world. It's got to be, we have to have this collective shift. So I think that's a huge difference. Yeah, and definitely something that I naturally write about that process. It's just natural in me to look at, well, okay, this is what's happening out there. This is what it looks like inside of you. that kind of process.
Yeah, and I like your way of looking at it, which is slightly maybe more of a fifth line version as opposed to my fourth line prophetic version.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting seeing where they meet. Because I've looked at things from a very with the kind of mechanics of human design and the I Ching and the gene keys. That's been my formula, but then I've used my imagination very strongly to, or the creative imagination to tune in to those patterns and then paint pictures, which is what the Gene Keys is. You know, we were talking about archetypes. You know, it's like it's brought a new flavor to the archetypes, and I'm constantly updating and exploring them. Like I've just redone the 59th Gene Key audio for the 3rd time in 10 years, because it just is new all the time, and new information is coming through us. And it's really inconvenient because I've then got to go and change it in the book, and I haven't rewritten it in the Gene Keys book. I think I'll leave that, but you know, but in the 64 ways, which are my audios, I've had, you know, I've got a book transcribed to those as well. And so that was one that maybe we could even begin with that, since I've mentioned it.
Go, that's a good idea.
It's nice to have a bit of a framework to our story.
Yes.
Because that's one of the codes that's, of course, changing us biologically and socially, isn't it? The 59. You start and I'll jump in.
Well, the thing that the 59, there's an image, because I have the images so strongly in my mind for each of the I'm going to say the hexagrams from the I Ching, because there's an image in each one, and the image is of the flood washing everything away. And in my favorite I Ching, which is the Hilary Barrett, she says you're completely disoriented, because everything familiar is just washed away. So that's the imagery of the 59 is the flood washing everything away.
Do you want to hear what mine is?
Yeah, tell me yours.
Mine is the music of Rachmaninoff. Because, you know, like if you've ever listened to Rachmaninoff, like some of his piano concertos, for example, there's a kind of, exactly. There's a kind of chaos, but with a harmony woven in it. And and that music, it breaks you down. You know, its pattern, it's like chaos theory. It actually just breaks you down. It's not harmonic in the normal way. It just pulls you apart, especially emotionally. It just starts to kind of shatter you. And that's my reference for the 59th hexagram Gene Key, that it's a musical energy that's breaking us, shattering us open. And so that it's quite chaotic in it, but there's also a beauty to it, a passion in it.
I think of the and I probably got the mythology wrong, but I think about the trumpet. This is the imagery that comes to me a lot in the last couple of years, of the trumpets blowing and the walls crumbling. And exactly. that kind of brings the two ideas together, as this, you know, this burst of a new frequency and rhythm, tempo, because that's just so much a part of the harmonics, is the rhythm and the tempo. And then everything that's in the old rhythm, tempo, frequency, however you want to describe it, melody, just can't survive in the new.
And there's a huge amount of trauma. I mean, I changed my little keynote recently when I did this. You know, each Gene Key, I kind of give it a dilemma. And so I changed it to trauma because it felt a better word. And I can't remember what the old word was now. Gone.
Washed away.
Trauma is what's coming out.
Yes.
You know, it's a very traumatic experience, and it's what's coming up in us as individuals and as a collective body, the past.
When we get those, as we have now, these big energies, the transpersonal planets, always the trauma seems to come from outside. So it's like there's an event, and as a result of that event, we have to respond to that, and responding to that brings up this collective trauma. And what I see at the moment is that the nations are actually starting to have to deal with their collective, their history, that all the things that have been hidden, you know, Brexit and the Black Lives Matters, and we've got all our colonial past ridiculousness coming up here. And these things are actually bringing up the trauma that each one of us holds personally as part of that, you know, collective sharing. I think that kind of comes up through the process as well.
Absolutely. It's, you know, a collective karma and individual karma, and how they intersect, and they have a slightly different flavor to each other. I don't know, people listening to this will probably, you know, know what I mean? Like if you're processing something that's from your own past, your own individual, this life, it has a certain quality to it. But when you're processing something that's ancestral, it feels poor, it's heavier, it's wider, it doesn't feel connected to you only. It just feels insurmountable sometimes, you know, like you're processing something on a certain day or on a, you know, and it's just there moving through you. And we're transmuting all that through our bodies.
And quickly, you know, I like that you said that at the start. It's like this is happening really quickly. I remember in the olden days, in the 90s, where we would lounge around and say, "Oh, it's such a heavy day today. Oh, must rest and process." And now it's like boom, 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 boom. Like you don't have time for that. It's like on to the next thing, so fast. And I think that the positive, you know, from talking to people, and I know you mentioned hope, and it's like, well, we want more than hope. We want to really believe that this is a worthwhile effort to make, in a sense. Like, should I even try, or should I just give up, walk away and let them destroy the place? The fact that we can engage because we're going somewhere that's worth going to, that we're making an effort for something that's worth making an effort for. Which again, I think is partly the 55, bringing, you know, so we talked about the 59, which is the destruction of the old. And that sense of, you know, in human design, that's a gate that says there's all of this stuff coming at me, but I'm going to, you know, hold it back, or I'm going to let it wash through me. I'm going to let the change happen and let it wash through me. My take on that. The 55, which is you call it the programming partner.
Get to 55, because there's another layer to 59 I think we should just touch on, which is it's kind of dismantling the energy field between individuals. That's what it does in the aura, in relationships. So it's because it's all about the strategies of relating, you know, for human design. And so it's cracking open this separation, you know,
the fear,
pulling open the fear that we are actually, you know, that makes us believe we are separate from each other. So it's changing the way we relate to each other at a chemical level. It's chemistry. So new kind of relationships are kind of being made possible, you know, a new kind of intimacy, you know, which in Gene Keys I call the transparency. It's kind of, that's what you get at the end, you know, when the process is finished. So there's these layers of intimacy that are kind of not just between just 2 or 3 people. It's like it's between everyone, and that's changing everything in our social structure. Because it's no longer to be about mother and father and husband and wife and all these old these old, very kind of beautiful things, but it's also it's opening up these, just, it's more multidimensional. So everyone then becomes your husband and your father and your mother and your, you know, in a way. So
love the one you're with.
So those traditional roles are breaking down. Which doesn't mean that we're kind of moving to some kind of necessarily polyamorous world, but because that's another story. But it does mean that we're beginning to feel the repercussions of that level of love, really.
We were talking about our kids before, and I'm sure that you'll notice the way that they have intimacy within their friendships and that kind of thing. That I never had that at that age. I didn't have that level of intimacy with my friends that my kids, who are in their 20s, older than your well, I don't know, but we were talking about my 22-year-old, your 12-year-old, so she's older. But that the kind of openness and even physical intimacy, just in terms of the way that they physically react to respond to each other, is very different to what it was like when we were younger.
Totally, their sexuality is completely different.
And I think about the 6, which joins the 59 in human design, and one of my takes on that is always that if I've got something inside of me that I don't want to look at, I will project it onto the other person, and I will create this kind of play that goes on. But if you think about that not being there, if I'm not saying, well, you are my opponent, or you are my competition, or you are, so any stepping out of that, you know, this is me creating my space, my world, then that creates the transparency, I think, that you're talking about, if we just look at it from a psychological point of view.
Yeah, because that was, of course, part of, in human design, called the defense circuit. So it's all about defending yourself from another person.
Yes.
That's the sort of shadow energy. But that's what's being broken down. Our defenses are being broken down on every level. You know?
Yes. And then
there's nothing we can do about it.
So and it's so nice not to live in.
Yeah.
I have a lovely story that I'm not going to tell you, but
well, you can.
No, I just take too long. But that's why I'm sitting here going. I was laying in the bath. I'll tell you a quick, very, very quick version. I was laying in the bath one day, looking out my window at the forest, and I thought, I just want to live without any defenses. And the bath water rocked while I was laying there, and I went. That was good.
It's true. I mean, it's true though. No doors, no windows, no boundaries, no borders, all of that.
Just that meeting.
And even no inner, no outer. You know, it's like it's at every level in our being.
Yes.
Where we're learning it. If there's a boundary somewhere, it's being tested.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes. You know, I was thinking about this idea of, which is part of the shift to 2027, is this idea of evolving away from our mammalian past. And I think the place that we're evolving around is the way in which we have developed the way we care for each other, the social interactions, like you said, that, you know, the family groupings, the roles and all that kind of stuff, and the sexual partnering in the mammalian kind of way. So to evolve beyond that into a greater level of individual consciousness embedded within the collective, or you know, as part of the collective matrix, that shifting out of the mammalian takes us into a place where all of that survival strategy, all of the survival strategy based in the social, we shift beyond that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. It's almost, you can't quite imagine what that will do to our civilization. So when I, you know, and that maybe brings a bit more to the 55, because when I look forward, I just sort of see only the new. You know, I don't see it having any relationship to what came before, you know, and that's why it's so hard to see where we're going. Because we tend to project where we're going based on where we've come from. So we look at the pattern of the past and we go, well, we've been heading this way with this tempo, and we've had a few blips, and why isn't it? It's surely going to continue like that, instead of it actually being a choke point and then a kind of rebirth. Which is the 49 in my gene keys. Like, it goes from reaction to revolution to rebirth, and rebirth is like, it's completely new. It has no relationship. Of course, it does have some relationship, but it's like, you can't see it right away. What's coming is going to look very different. So the whole world is going to look different. I've read these prophecies and things by great teachers who sometimes say, you know, the air will be different, the water will be different, the light itself, the quality of the light will be perceived differently. We'll see a wider spectrum.
Well, I was going to say that makes sense, because our perception will shift.
Yeah.
So exactly. It makes sense that we will experience, you know, things like light and sound, and I mean, sound.
Fundamental. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, and it's also, one thing I think is nice in a way for people to kind of grasp is that, like, the 55th gene key, the 55, I've always seen it as very romantic, you know, like it's the emotional romantic way. But it's like, I feel this is a very romantic time in high romance. Like it's the part in all the fairy tales where the kind of sleeping beauty awakens. You know, there is a sort of, there's a huge yearning in humanity for this, for what's coming. It's in all our stories and our myths, and it's encoded in us, this reconciliation, this time of atonement, this time of heaven on earth and all that. And so it's kind of, it's something very beautiful and very, you know, captivating that's coming.
A lot of people describe it that way to me, which I think is amazing, actually, that they can look at what's going on and be more focused on what's coming out of all of this, rather than stuck in, you know, what's going bad. And can I just tell you, I might have mentioned this before, but in Gate 55 for a long time, actually, I'm not sure, maybe 10 years, there's been a dwarf planet transiting in Gate 55 called it was called Snow White until a couple of months ago they changed the name to Gong Gong, which is but the idea of that, and I really noticed that whenever there was a transit, there were all these Snow White kind of ideas. So I felt like that was a great name for that planet. But the idea of, you know, being the waking up, spitting out the poison, realizing that there's poison that you've taken in kind of inadvertently, and spitting that out and waking up. And also think about the coming together too of the, you know, the polarities, the masculine and the feminine or whatever, and having that different kind of relationship from the old one.
Well, and it's funny that it's often the princess who awakens in those myths, isn't it? It's the feminine that awakens, you know. It's been asleep, you know, which is the holistic, you know, connective picture.
In the asteroids, there's just such a lot going on with the young feminine, that sovereign, wild young woman who says, I don't belong to anyone, and that, you know, there's a purity to that energy and a kind of natural wisdom to that energy, and very much connected to animals and very much connected to nature. And I see that really strongly at the moment being activated over the next little while. And Vesta right now, she's the sovereignty of each person, the heart flame, as I call it, the sovereign nature of our most sacred being, our most sacred creative self,
the
which
sort of
is
Vestal
waking
Virgin.
up before the coming of the Romans or whatever, you know, who basically said, well, I know you think this is your temple, girls, but we're in charge now.
Yeah, totally. I'm with you.
Yes, don't worry, we'll look after you.
Yes.
No worries. So that that young, pure kind of consciousness, but very much the spark of I'm thinking about hope, and kind of almost too innocent to know. I have to turn my heater off. Almost too innocent to know that something's not possible.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm with you. The pure eternus, you know, which is the eternal, you know, the golden child.
Sorry,
which is the spirit of every human.
Yes, absolutely. Just sorry, making a lot of noise here.
That's right.
Because it just got too hot. Okay, I'm good now. It's cold here, but it's cold for Australia. It's not that cold. So yes, I think that might take us to 4, which is an interesting place. That idea of to me, the idea of not knowing, being able to turn up and say, I only know from what was in the past. I don't know what's in front of me, but I'm prepared to stand here and go, whoa, this is amazing. I wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Are you talking about the 4th?
The 4th, yeah.
Yeah. Which is in the 4th hexagram, the 4th gene key, the 4th gate. It's interesting, I was saying to you, because that was something that Ra had mentioned in his more prophetic courses, was about the 4 kind of breaking, a split, or a kind of almost a ceiling between the 4 and the 63. So they split off. And And I guess my way of interpreting that is almost like a short circuit through that part. And I remember he would talk about like that's the end of our kind of exploration into science, you know. But I think it's more about us changing our reliance on logic, you know, and understanding that beyond logic, through the doorway of paradox, lies truth, you know, which is for me the other end of that chapter 63 is truth. And you can grasp truth without logic, but you can then understand it through logic. It's almost as a backup. So for me, I describe this as like the way science has operated, the way the mind, the left brain mind has operated, is beginning with doubt and then trying to work towards truth. And I see it as a reversal, where we come to a place where we actually begin with truth because we feel the truth of something. We know it in every bone of our body. And then we go, okay, let's go work backwards from that and actually work out how it came about with the logic. Because then the logic moves towards the truth instead of going off down all these doubt alleys. And then leads to argumentation, you know, often an opinion, as opposed to, we all feel this truth, let's go and prove it. Let's use logic.
Let's explore.
And
I was so totally with you on that. And if you think about in the human design body graph, you've got that 63.4. The rest of the circuitry is in the spleen center. Now, I use that channel all the time. That's where a lot of my writing comes from, up there. And I feel in my body, and I feel it like, yes, that's the right word. Don't use that word. Or even when I was just making some notes for today, okay, the next thing that I need, the next piece I need to put in here to create this pattern, this beautiful pattern of what I'd like to bring to the table today is this. And so my body tells me, and I'm so physically uncomfortable if it's not the right thing. And yet I'm being very logical. You know, one thing I think is very interesting, always interested me with the 4, is it talks in the I Ching about the young fool who needs to listen to his master. And it was put to me at one point by a teacher that I should listen more and not have my own ideas so much, which I thought was interesting because it got me thinking about the 4 and it got me thinking about the 4 and the fact that the 4, the impulse from the 4, what's in relationship most closely with the 4 is the 63, which says everything that you know is gone. That's the completion point. Everything you know is gone. What's the new pathway? Where are we going to go now? And it's that pressure to find where we're going next that really informs where the 4 takes, you know, the next steps to what does it want to explore. It's standing on the brink always of something brand new, and it has to be a learning experience. We have to turn up with no expectations about what it's going to look like.
I think it's I really broke through when I wrote the Gene Keys into that 4, because it was like understanding is the gift and understanding is, you know, and then but then the city, the highest component of it is forgiveness, which you think is like, what does forgiveness have to do with the brain and the mind? Actually, it's based on like understanding the truth of something, you know, and it connects it back to the emotional system, the 49, which is its opposite, you know, which is, so these are interconnected, the way in which the solar plexus gut operates and the brain operates. They're so connected, the gray matter of the brain, the gray matter of the solar plexus, that you cannot separate them out in a way that and this is to do with this kind of rewiring inside us. So forgiveness is deeply important because it means it's about the letting go of the trauma of the past. It's not just forgiveness of ourselves, which is a deep part of it. It's also the forgiveness of all being, you know, all that stuff has to be wiped so that we can understand again, you know, and then the truth
I love that.
revealed inside our body through our being. And I often see like Forgiveness is a very mysterious city, and if you explore Gene Keys and you kind of do this thing called the 7 Seals, which is like a more mystic branch of Gene Keys, that 4 is one of those 7 seals, and each of those 7 seals is here to heal a specific wound.
Yeah.
And the 4 heals the wound of rejection. Yeah. It's literally the one where we pushed each other, we pushed out of the Garden of Eden, or we were like became separate, and it's the heart wound, you know. So that forgiveness is really, really powerful in how it kind of comes down and clears all that old stuff, and it clears the fog from the mind as well.
Yeah.
It opens up those pathways, that new perception, you know, with new light. And
forgiveness makes sense to me in that way also, that we have to forgive ourselves for trying to block ourselves moving forward. Almost, it's like our minds really strongly saying, no, this is the truth, this is what I know, and the rest of our body saying something different. It's like when you talk about rejection, it's really interesting, because in my experience of that channel, the thing that I experience most strongly is humiliation. Not knowing, not being, you know, feeling stupid. This is something that I see comes up a lot for people with this. I feel stupid because I don't know, but it's not knowing in the old way, and it's completely different to what you're talking, you know, the way that you describe it, with the understanding, with that sense of that whole body knowing, of taking in the emotional side of things as well. And if we forgive ourselves for the limitations of the past and allow ourselves now to walk forward with a more fulsome way of knowing, and not reject any ideas that threaten who we thought we should be, which is a big part of it as well. Think how tightly people hold on to their notions of what they know.
Their opinions, their secrets, all of those things. That's part of the breaking down through the 59, is opening up the transparency, so that there actually can't really be any secrets anymore, because the body is opening up its wiring in the quantum field. So it means we start to our awareness starts to travel through each other, like the internet. And that's what's creating the kind of incredible change, because imagine your awareness traveling through another being, and your mind traveling along those pathways through that being. You know, your mind could literally go through that being like a website, and just search wherever you like, and that person has no defenses to stop you. I mean, that for some people is terrifying, but like, that's why the trauma has to come up. That's why the forgiveness has to come, so that we can let go of all that stuff, because everyone's going to see it.
And once we do, and I think, you know, we're getting, like, this is not out there, this is actually happening. I mean, it's something that it's familiar to me, that process. And of course, not that I'm all the way there, but the process of transparency and the process of being able to, you know, experience the other person in a more transparent way is more and more familiar to me.
Which is why one of the practicalities that comes out of this is that we learn to listen to each other, you know, and suspend our judgment and just sit in presence. Like when we're doing in Gene Keys, we do these dives, these deep dives, these collective contemplations over months of our profiles and things. And what we do is we have these community calls where we model this listening. You know, so someone shares, there's usually a group of 5, and they don't know each other, they've met, they're from different countries in the world, but they're focusing on the same thing. And they've been focusing on it for a whole month. There's maybe one Gene Key in their chart, and it might be their life's work. And you know, their personality sun in human design, and then they share that process and what that journey has been for them, and whatever comes out, but everyone else is not offering advice or even comfort. Their comfort is coming from their presence and their love, and it's really beautiful to experience that level of intimacy and modeling without the kind of life coach thing, you know. It's coming in,
totally.
you know, where you like step out of your thing and I've got to try and help this person, whereas actually to be listened at that deep level, especially by a group of strangers, is very healing for us. Because
who needs helping? What if you're not a victim? You know, I think that sense of treating people as victims and thinking that's a good thing is so just inherent in the way we do spirituality. To have that kind of radical acceptance of the health and holism of that person in that moment is more powerful than helping or trying to fix or any of that kind of stuff. There's an integrity, I think, in that process.
Totally. Should we talk a bit about the sort of planetary implications of the 55? Because I'm sure a lot of people are worried about the Earth, Gaia, and like the actual process of transmutation through Gaia. You know? Right, because we're talking about it in the individual and in the species, but what about the planet itself? Like, are we going to destroy it? That's probably people's fear. Like, what about the creatures and the melting poles and the ice caps and the global warming, all of it?
I mean, this is not particularly hopeful, but I've kind of come to the place where I think, well, I can do what is the right thing for me to do, which is, you know, whatever I feel is the right thing for me to do, and I can just see what happens. I mean, it's in one way, it's extraordinary to think that, I mean, where I live now, it could be underwater in a little while because I'm right near the beach. There can be huge shifts. And I think that there probably will be huge shifts to the way in which the Earth actually deals with the amount of humans and their interaction with nature. But I also think, you know, Ra says there was a prime magnetic monopole, which is the Earth's magnetic monopole, and that connects with the sun, and everything comes down through the sun into the Earth, and then reflects. The moon's there too, and then each one of us is connected to that. This is a partnership process, I think, and not us as some kind of parasite on the Earth, you know, and like the Earth hates us because we're there's this tremendous intelligence in the partnering that's going on. One of the ways that I see it is you know, when we work with the gene keys or human design, we give our birth details. So it's time and space. It's when you anchored physically on the planet. And of course, the planet, our Earth, is moving in multiple different ways through space all the time. So we anchor in time and space, and then there's this incredible ride that we go on in time and space. And I think we're getting more and more into the structural integrity of that time and place. And as we come more and more into partnership with that, almost like a perfect geometry of that movement through those dimensions, everything becomes more, I can actually even feel while I'm talking about it, this kind of stillness. There's a kind of stillness which is a harmonic that we bring into reality. And that takes us to a place which, as you said earlier, it's hard to imagine what that's going to be like, really.
Yeah. I've called that the stilling of the wave, which is what the emotional, it takes place in our solar plexus, because, you know, the emotional plane, you know, for our awareness to rise kind of up through it, you know, it doesn't leave it, it transcends it, and then but then it's still there to be enjoyed and appreciated, all the emotional realm. But it means that we no longer it's like we're no longer underwater. You know, we're surfing, you know, and that's why the symbol for me is the dragonfly, because it leaves its underwater realm and then it starts to live in the air realm. And yes, and that stilling of the wave is I definitely can feel that as well as something that's coming for us all, to feel completely different, to no longer be embedded in our emotional reality and lost in the pain and the separation of that can come from that, but to be able to dive and play through it, and like a diving bird, you know, that comes down into the ocean, swims, dives, and then goes back up again. And that will be our ability. And yeah, I also see, I think what you're saying about the sun and the earth is really key, because the thing that people often forget or don't even realize is humanity is a part of the intelligence of the earth. You know, and we think of ourselves as separate and doing something to the earth, instead of seeing ourselves as the earth doing something to itself. So and that doesn't get us off the hook for our things we're doing that are, you know, are kind of irresponsible, but it does give a different perspective, because you realize that we're part of the earth and we're doing something to the earth, and that something is required at some level in order that the earth can change. And if you look back on like the big mutations of our species, and science and biology now know this, that the biggest changes always come through trauma. Sometimes it's been a cataclysm, or it's been a flood, or it's been there's got to be big changes, and the sun is deeply connected. The sunspots and solar flares have a huge impact on the cellular life. You know, so these cycles of intense change kind of create this kind of climate of mutation. You know, and literally I say that word climate, like the climate is needed to be hotter in order for the mutation to take place. And then the melting of the poles, even the waters, like the releasing of memory information back into the world in a way that, you know, all of that is part of the process, you know, that we don't need to be so alarmed about. What I want to be clear on is that we do need to act to try and stop it. But we also, you know, wherever we can, you know, to improve it and to help Indigenous peoples and to, you know, improve the environment as obviously wherever we can, to the fullness of our intent. And that's a, you know, valid passion. But there's also underneath a kind of perfection to the change, and we can trust in that. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a magic, I think, to the earth and to our world and our relationship with it that's not necessarily really strictly in the physical realm. And I'll give you an example. I've got a friend who's got who's basically, anyway, an extraordinary person, and lives away from the world a bit, just stays on her property. And she has a very small water tank, and because in Australia, a lot of people have water tanks. Not so much in the cities, but outside of them. And while she just has as long a shower as she wants, and she doesn't worry about water at all. And when all her neighbours are having to have their huge tanks refilled by trucks, she's always got plenty of water. She's never run out of water at all. So there's also this sense of, I think, of great trust and great relationship with the material realm, when we really understand that it's alive and that we're interacting with it with tremendous consciousness. And I just want to bring Gate 11 in here for a moment, because I think it's one of the most important, I don't know about the gene keys, but certainly hexagrams. And is this one of your quotes? The wise prefer to live in harmony with the laws of nature. I think it might be. I think that's from the gene keys for the 11. Yeah, it could be. I think it is. And the thing with Gate 11 is that it's heaven and earth, and the human standing in the center. So when you have the 1, which is the yang, and then you have the 2, which is the yin, or heaven and earth. And when you get to the 11, you've got heaven and earth coming together in one hexagram. So it's the place where in those first 10 hexagrams it gets to this place where they come into relationship with each other. The thing that brings them into relationship is the harmoniousness harmoniousness of the human that lives harmoniously with both heaven and earth and acts as a conduit for those two things to come together. And I feel that that's key for how we can live now, is to find something that is really uniquely like each person has their own version. It's not like there's some kind of rule for how you live harmoniously. Each person has their own experience of the harmony. And I think that Gate 11 really brings that into play. And for me, that's the most powerful way to address the environmental stuff. For someone, it might mean going out to a protest. I went to a protest the other day and I was really bored and I came home after 5 minutes. I have to say, it's not my thing. You know, I really support it, but it wasn't my thing. And I just had a little giggle to myself and came home. So each person has their own version of harmony and what that looks like.
I think the 11 is really key, because it's these two. It's a doorway, isn't it? It's like, that's what it is. It's even visually a doorway.
Yeah.
And Gene Keys, it's light. I mean, it's weird. It's just sort of one-off in a way, because the city is light and the idealism, and so it is the connection between all things and all beings. And it's also, like we mentioned this earlier about it's two ones, it's like
of course, I didn't think about that.
It's actually it's the higher illusion of the two, that duality is an illusion, right? But the 11's been the whole way through the game. It's gone all the way up through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's had initiation through all those numbers and those geometries, and it's got to 10 and it's completed, and then it's gone, oh, there's another new world. It's like there's endless, infinite new worlds out here. Let's go create again. 11, 12, 13, and on it goes on its infinite journey. So it's a threshold, but it's also, which is light, because light is infinite, and so it is this illusion of duality, but it's also what you said, like it's infinite creativity, and that's what this, when Ra has spoken about the great this change, he's always made it sound like individual survivalists, we're all going to perish, and except for the fittest and the weird ones that are coming, and they're all going to die anyway, and because that's his miserable view of the future. But it's like I don't see that at all. I just see this infinite doorway opening up into infinite creativity, as we begin to as we become a galactic human. And that's what the 11 is. You can correct me here, but I'm pretty sure that it leads to the galactic core. Isn't that where the 11th hexagram is?
Absolutely. I actually say that channel is that channel relates to all of the people who say, I'm not quite sure why I got dropped on this planet.
It's right, it's idealism.
Something that and I've written JK, so I think this is from the Gene Keys as well in my crazy notes here. The way images can be used by the imagination, and you've mentioned imagination a few times, and that's a really big key for me, because I think our imagination has been really dumbed down to the point where we have, the idea of, you're that's just in your imagination, or stop dreaming, or that's just a fantasy. So all those ideas create so much fear, because we have no agency to create in any real way. We've given up all our agency to, other gods, or, ideas of nirvana, heaven, whatever. We've given up our agency to act out of this terrible fear that we don't know what we're doing. We can't trust ourselves. And I think for me, with Pluto transiting in the 61 and all of that energy in the 61, what that's doing is that's forcing us through, as you say, the trauma. All we have to rely upon is ourselves and what we know to be true, because who knows, there's so much being said by everyone. What's true for me? What do I feel in my body? What are my emotions telling me? What's my intuition telling me? All of this multiplicity of extraordinary awareness that each one of us walks around with every day and uses such a small part of, to actually begin to know how to use that in an imaginative and creative way to start to begin to create a future that is,
I think that's
more caring.
I think that's eminently the most practical thing we can offer here today. Is like big, you know, the future is going to happen anyway. So that why don't, you know, like my invitation to anyone watching this is begin to dream it. You know, begin the process now. Dream in using your higher imagination, following your intuition. Dream in the world that you want to happen, you know, and begin to create it in small ways, and then see it build. But don't hold back anything in your imagination, anything, you know, because as you say, that's the fear, because the imagination, that's why in that Gene Key 11, it goes fantasy, idealism, light. And you know, the idealism is like opening up to allow the light in. You know, the mind is just filled with light. The mind is essentially an infinite tool. It's not even a tool, it's an infinite field of knowing. So when we open it up through the idealism, you know, through opening up to like, this is the world I want to inhabit. The fantasy is when you just dream it, but you don't really do anything. You just go around in the dreams. You know,
I think fantasy is in a limit cycle with fear. You know, if it gets caught and trapped inside the fear, sorry, I interrupted you then. It's like,
no, it's cool.
I want that thing, but I can never have it. So that makes it a fantasy. Whereas I want that thing. Let's see how this, you know, starts to play out. Let's see what happens now I've had that kind of desire for something new. Let's see where it goes.
So on that note, I'd also like to talk about, because we mentioned it earlier, the Trinity, and because that's where the 11 leads to the awareness and understanding of the Trinity. And in my 55th Gene Key, when I write about lots of unusual things, but one of the things I write about is the 7 races, root races, as they're called, which are like, in a way, the kind of long global history of our species and beyond us, you know, going back from the beginning of the earth itself. And so we are moving to a new race, you know, to a new, you know, into a new, completely new phase of our consciousness, of evolution. And I've called that name, I gave it the Trivian Race. So right now, you know, we're moving from what the esoterics call the Aryan race, slightly unfortunate name because of the stuff that got attached to that. But the Trivian race is about the triple way, everything being threes. And so the Trivian race is actually, that is our next kind of, it's the penultimate one, because the final one's called Pangaean, which is the one where everything comes into oneness. Everything becomes aware of itself as one, the whole Gaia, or eco biome, you know. So that's the kind of final flourishing heaven on earth. But the Trivian is the one before that, where it's discovering that. So it has to go rewiring itself in every tiny facet of the cosmos and the earth. It has to go, oh, I'm in the beetle. Oh, I'm in the blade of grass. The blade of grass belongs there in that part. And it's putting together, not as a mental thing, it's understanding the holographic. It's understanding the hologram. Earth is a hologram. Everything is a hologram here. And it's understanding where everything fits in that hologram, and everything belongs in threes. Everything is mapped in threes. And it's like a crystal built out of threes, out of trinities, millions and millions of trinities. So, and this is a knowing, these are knowings. So the more you find and re-embed yourself in those trinities, and every human being is doing the same, is embedding themselves in their trinities. What we're doing is we're building this kind of master crystal, you know, of awareness. And so I'm trying to describe something that's very indescribable.
I'm totally there with you. Totally there. And we talked about this before we started recording. We were both like, oh yeah, this is this is the thing. You know, one of the things I love about it is chaos theory, fractal theory. That, you know, you have one and then you have two. and the 2 becomes a 3, and each time you get a 2, there's a new branch and a new branch, and so everything's created from the 3. So the 2, or as you said before, the 2 always becomes the 3, because it's always about the relationship between things. And I think prior to the trinary, we have the binary, which is just, you know, it's why people get married and then they say, well, now we need a kid, kind of thing. It's like, well, now, you know, there's the 2 of us and that's fine, but there's got to be more. There's something more always. Always when you bring 2 things together, there's the relationship, and the relationship gives birth to something new. So we're coming out of that duality and into, and again, for me, this comes back to the creative imagination. It's like, well, now I've got these 2 things. What am I going to create from this? Not just, oh no, I'm stuck in this pole and the other pole's over there and there's nothing I can. Well, no, we've got 2 poles. They're coming together. There's transparency. They're coming into relationship with each other. What am I going to create from this? Where am I going to take this? And you know what I love about your description of going around and looking at the beetle and the blade of grass? In the 62, the thing, because I'm developing these quantum strategies for each of the gates, and in the 62, I always say to people, that's the butterfly effect, where you take this tiny little step, and every time you take a tiny little step, everything in the universe changes. So this idea that we have to keep go, you know, make a goal out there and work linearly towards it is so dumb, because each step that you take shifts everything forever. And then you have to stop and think, okay, or not think, but no, how's everything feel now? What's the next thing I want to create? And then you take the next step, and it's a very quantum thing. It's into the quantum realm, back into the material realm, into the quantum realm, back into the material realm. What's the next thing now that everything's changed forever? It makes us very powerful in terms of our ability to be consciously creating, when we understand the impact of every small thing that we do. And actually, I think the sun's sitting right on Follis today, I just noticed, or the moon, which is the centaur that says every tiny little thing that you do creates a massive difference in the world. Every tiny little thing you do. So to me, coming back to the trinary, it's like you have these constant bifurcation points where you can change the world forever, and you have a choice to make in each of those points.
Absolutely.
How does that relate back to your idea?
It's totally symbiotic, you know, and it's why I saw, you know, for those of people who are interested in human design, and I'll show you this one day. I'll map it out and show it and talk it through, but here's a little preview. You know, the body graph from human design is a 9-centered thing, and everyone goes on about we've left the 7 centers, we're in the 9 centers, and it's actually, to me, it's not. The 9 centers is actually a 3. It's a triple 3. And so when you evolve in consciousness, you don't go to more centers, you go to less centers. You become more efficient, more effective, more simple, more pure. And actually what's happening is the 7's moving to the 3 through the 9. And the 9 is really the 3-3. So what's happening is the 3 awareness centers are coming together as one. And then let me just, the 3 motors, the root, the sacral, and the throat are coming together as one. And then the head center, the G center, and the ego, spleen. Or the the spleen is one of the awareness. So that's awareness. These are the directional centers. The direction of the heart center is the direction of us as through communities. The G center is our spiritual direction, and the head center is our direction, you know, in time space. You know, so they're 3 3s that are all coming together. There's a mystery in that. I haven't explored it myself. So what you end up with is 3 centers kind of networked through a kind of 4th center that isn't a center, where the monopole sits in the middle. And that trinary being is then this new race, this new species. So you no longer need any body graphs or charts or maps because it's embodied now. You don't need to do that through logic. You just feel it.
Yeah.
So we're moving into, that's where you no longer need the science, you no longer need the technology and the science in the same way, because we are it.
Yeah.
We are the technology. We are the science.
Yeah.
So that's where we're heading.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, yes, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, how do you resonate with that?
Yeah, it wasn't where I was expecting you to go. I thought you were going to be more kind of like hit this bit and this bit and this bit. So I was like, hang on, where's he going with all of that?
Yeah, go on.
So that was great. That was a bit of a journey to say, oh, that's not what I was expecting him to say. And the thing about leaving behind the technology, you know, yes, I agree. And certainly growing beyond the you know, the idea of the human design chart is a thing that we need to pay attention to, et cetera, for sure. I'm there with you. And the idea of the trinary and the three, I mean, it's absolutely in alignment with complexity theory, which I'm about to grow beyond. Hang on. No, but the idea that it gets simpler and more complex, richer, deeper, not more complicated.
Well, because it's a hologram, so it's infinitely more complex, but infinitely more simple.
Yes, and always I always want to make that distinction between complicated and complex, because they're such different animals, really. So it makes sense. I think you mentioned a little while ago, and I was like, that makes so much sense that it's coming down to the three. And I like it. I'd like to talk more about it as well. Okay, anything else that you want that we haven't mentioned that you think's important?
I guess the solar plexus, I'd like to finish on that.
Yep.
Go on. Because it's in the body and we can relate to it, and people might want something to actually do.
Yeah, sure.
So what I often kind of say to people is, you know, when things get tough, put both your hands on your solar plexus, on your belly, and just hold them there, and or gently massage, or do it to your friend or your son or your lover or whatever. And it's like, that is the part of the body where the change is like intensified. That's the cauldron, the alchemical cauldron. And in a sense, we're all one big belly. We're all one, you know, navel center. But by bringing your love to that place in your body, you know, over time, repeatedly, you really help the awareness to kind of settle. And, you know, so if and when things get hard for any of us, that's a really good primary thing we can do. Just hold each other's bellies, hold our own bellies. Because that's, as I said, that biome, that microbiome, is where everything is occurring. The mystery is occurring. The mystery.
Can I just add one? Not that I want to have the last word or anything, but I
please.
I just want to say something. You know, for the 2027 thing, this idea that we're shifting to the individual from the tribal to the individual, and I just want to address that briefly, because I think the idea of the individual is, you know, that kind of rugged individualism, going it alone, all that kind of stuff. And that's, for me, that's not the individual energy that we're moving into. What we're moving into is this sense of the solar plexus center. What made me think of just mentioning this is, in the chakra system, it's about our personal power. And we've really given up our personal power through the fear of stepping outside of the tribal norms. And so part of that discomfort in the solar plexus center right now is the uniqueness of each one of us that is wanting to break free of these old rules about, you know, who it's safe to be and what it's safe to do, and, you know, what's possible, even what we're allowing ourselves to imagine. So there is this individual empowerment process that's happening now that is, I think, making people really uncomfortable, because we're basically, and let's go back to the fall for a minute, we're basically walking out into there's no land to put our feet on, but we're creating the way as we walk it. So that feeling of walking into the unknown is something that is the very antithesis of the old communal kind of energy, that what I call the circle of approval. It keeps us all safe. Like, I'm inside the circle of approval of my community, I'm safe. Well, now we're all walking beyond that circle. And we're all walking our own pathway, and I think that is uncomfortable, and I think that's what's creating the issue with the needing to. But yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I love what you said about holding each person's belly in just being the love that's there for that.
Well, it's, as you say, it's freedom. That's the 55 is freedom.
Yeah.
And freedom is scary. You know, like if you've been trapped, if you've been in a prison for 20 years, and then someone opens the door, you're like, oh my God, that's quite scary. Like, all that space, all that possibility.
Yeah.
How do you move from this to that?
Yeah.
That's
slowly.
Yeah, slowly.
Gradually, step by step. And the 55 in the I Ching is the eclipse. But the eclipse, and it's like, oh my God, everything's gone dark. But the eclipse was actually a sign to go out and do the thing that needs to be done. So there's a paradox there, which I think is perfect for our times as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of hope. It's more than hope. There's certainty.
Yes.
Coming. Yeah, of the freedom.
For me, there's a natural. I can feel the energy of what we're putting together. I can physically feel the structure and the integrity forming in what we're doing as more and more of us come on board with this new energy. And I think the idea that it's going to happen fast, but we're anchored in that emerging, it's almost like a new kind of collective Merkaba in a sense. And the more of us that are anchored in that through our own individual empowerment, that's going to make it easier and easier.
Yeah, it's important in a way. I mean, I got to finish on the 56 because I mentioned that to you, didn't it? Because I love the 56, and it comes after the 55. So it's like,
and it adds up to 11.
Yeah, thank you. It's important not to be distracted. Like the 56 is the shadow's distraction. If you get distracted by the process of all this, if you get overly distracted by the crisis itself, by the turmoil, by the kind of pathways of that, because it's unfolding, then you're kind of leaving your center, right? Yeah. So the most important thing is to stay in the center and actually draw sustenance from the change, whatever it is. This is enrichment. And then the highest level of it is intoxication, and it's to actually really enter into the center of the storm, with your eyes wide open, embrace it with your heart wide open and go, yes, say yes to it. Yeah. Say yes to the change, say yes to the trauma, say yes to the toxin, say let it in, let it through. And one of my favorite writers, a guy called Hamvas Bella, he's a Hungarian writer. I don't know if you've ever heard me speak about him. He's not very well known.
No, but I looked him up just before we talked.
Did you?
Because
did you?
I did.
Well, I love him, but he's kind of his time, but and he has some quite male views, but he also says things that no one would even say now. About, he's written this beautiful book, essay called The Philosophy of Wine. And since Pholus is there, it'd be quite appropriate.
Yes.
About wine. And in that story, in that essay, he uses it as a kind of metaphor, wine as a metaphor for living well, for really living well.
Yeah.
And so what he in a way laid out a kind of future spirituality where it's not all about being in the clouds, that's an aspect of it, but it's also about enjoying every tiny aspect of creation, you know, sipping the wine, and you know, even, you know, he'll like, he lays out like all the sort of like, after this meal you need to have this kind of cigarette, and then you follow it by this kind of wine at this time, and it's like, but he's developed this entire world of measure, you know, of like tasting tiny toxic substances in homeopathic doses and enjoying life through them.
Right. Yes.
You know,
okay.
So so it's a symbol really for me. It's like, you know, we're here to enjoy the world.
Yes, not try and avoid it because it's not spiritual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anything goes. That's freedom, right? Freedom is like anything goes.
Yeah.
You can
absolutely.
keep all of it.
Yeah.
You can keep all your vices in little tiny compartments, but they won't take over your life anymore.
Yeah. So intoxication is the experience of being fully open and present in the moment, but not losing yourself because of the trauma, not dissociating because of the trauma. And I think there's a really big difference, and I think that is a huge key to the place that we're going now, which is that we can embrace the experience and be intoxicated by it, but not dissociating because of trauma. So that brings the transparency and the level of intimate connection that creates the change.
Brilliant.
Good spot to finish on. Thanks, Richard.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim.